We absolutely depend on people joining us and contributing to this conversation. So please share on every available forum that you sign up to. In order to look at this again, you can. We're going to record it as always, and it will be available, all the debates available afterwards. And the links will be sent to the mailing list, or you can search on Hexham TV. So thank you very much for Hexham TV, who's in partnership with Hexham Debates. They're also shared on the website. So there's some past archival recordings that are actually in storage at the moment. So they haven't disappeared, and we're trying to get them back on the website. So apologies if you're searching for something that happened back in the day. So as usual, our speaker will speak for 30 minutes, then we'll have 30 minutes of questions and discussion. Can you please keep yourself muted at all times unless you're asked to speak? And if you want to ask a question, please put it in the chat or raise your Zoom hand and then unmute yourself and then speak. It's quite good if you can post them in the chat, just because we can group some together, but it doesn't matter if that's not what you want to do. So what I would like to do is to introduce Harriet Lamb. So Harriet Lamb is the Chief Executive of WRAP, the Waste and Resources Action Programme. She will be speaking on circular living. So if you didn't know that, you're probably in the wrong place. But just a little bit of background. Before that, Harriet led Ashton, which was supporting inspiring solutions for climate change in UK cities, schools, and around the world. She also led International Alert, that were building peace and are building peace in over 20 countries. And prior to that, she spent 16 years at the helm of Fair Trade in the UK and globally. And she was the CEO of Fair Trade International in Germany and of the Fair Trade Foundation in the UK. I like this comment. Please excuse me, Harriet. She had a wonderful role as a banana coordinator for some years, which is a title not many people can claim. And she still cannot resist popping on the odd banana suit for special conferences. So all I can say is that let your imaginations run riot. And thank you so much, Harriet, for agreeing to speak. And over to you. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, and good morning, everybody. I have to warn you that in true fashion, I have dodgy internet this morning. It still manages to be a bit bobbly. I don't know. Can you all do a little thumbs up if you can hear it all right? Or is it it is a bit dodgy? Oh, well, there's nothing we can do at this stage. It's just decided this morning to go bobbly. So I'm very sorry, everyone. And we just hope if it gets too bad, let us know. I'm going to turn off my camera when I share my slides in the hope that that will help a little bit. I wanted to first say what a privilege to be speaking at the Hexham Debates. I think it's such a brilliant initiative that has lasted so many years to give people that chance to come together and think about the kind of society. A special privilege to come so soon after one of my heroes, Paul Rogers, who, when I worked in peace building and previously campaigning against arms sales to repressive regimes, Paul was such a guru and a mentor to me. So it's really a very special treat to be here speaking with you all about the kind of economy we might want to see now and in the future. So now I'm going to try sharing my screen and some slides, and I'm going to turn my camera off in the hope that that helps. So let's see if this works. Taking its time for a minute. Right. And can you see the slides, everybody? Penny, can you see the slides all right?
Yes.
Yes, great. So I'm going to stop my video and talk through some slides. And what I have a little headlines about the issues that we face, the fact that we are drowning in waste and living as if we had 3 planets, as the reasons for why we need to make this shift to a circular economy, to bringing circular living into all our homes and every boardroom and all government policy. And although it's a bit early, I wanted to start with a few pub quiz questions, which, as we're not together in one room, you'll have to answer for yourselves. Starting with, which bird is this? Now, of course, everybody in Northumberland will know very well that it is a curlew. And it is one of the joys living in Slaley when the curlews come back from their winter holidays and you hear their cry. And it's also, for me, they represent the crisis that we face, that this bird that was once so common is now under threat of extinction, some of the subspecies, that we have lost 65% of our curlews since 1970, with a combination of changing farming, changing land use, and climate change. And for me, that extraordinary eerie cry of the curlew that is famed in so much poetry and literature is the cry of the world and of nature, that we need to do something about the way we're living. And each of you will have your story that speaks to the climate crisis, but for me, it is about the curlews. That is why we need to take action. And now I wanted to continue my pub quiz, but my slides are not moving on. And there we go. And so you can see that my next pub quiz question is, which country was responsible for over half of all global greenhouse gas emissions over the past 100 years? And the answer is, of course, the UK. Now we're not responsible for half, but of course we started emitting carbon dioxide before some of those other big emitters, which means we're responsible for half. And I think that also underlines our responsibility, therefore, that we take action to address that situation and that we lead the way. And my last question is about which sector caused the highest greenhouse gas emissions. And obviously we hear a lot about transport and manufacturing and energy, and then there's consumer purchased goods. And in fact, the answer is that it is consumer purchased goods. It is the food, the clothes, the electronic items, the stuff that we all buy that is in fact responsible for 45% of all global greenhouse gas emissions. And that, again, is one of the reasons why we have to think about how can we change the way we're running the economics? How can we put the eco back into economics? But at the moment, the way economics is running is in a linear model where we take, make, and throw away, except there is no away in throw away. And that's why our world is now, we're awash with plastic. And for all the good progress that has been made, the amount of plastic being used every year and the amount of plastic that is littering, it is polluting our oceans and our land, is only going up. And we're also awash. These are just two examples to illustrate the issue, that people are just buying more and more clothes. So we've done lots of work with companies to reduce the carbon footprint of their clothes and to reduce the water footprint, because we at WRAP work a lot with companies together on collective action to address some of these problems. And they're making huge progress, but it's all cancelled out by the fact they're selling more stuff, and that sales of clothes are just going up and up and up. And people buy things and wear them once and put them in the bin as part of a whole economic system that is running without thinking about what happens to the end of life. And that's why we need to really think about how can we shift from that model to a model that is about a circular model, where we make something thinking of its end life and everything is reused, refurbished, restored, recycled, and goes round in a circular way. And then if you come to food waste, it is extraordinary to think how much food we're wasting in a world where, of course, so many people go hungry and don't have enough, that in fact we have food waste. Something like a third of all food that is grown, it ends up being thrown away. And that's not only a tragic waste of food, of all the farmers' work, it is also, of course, a complete waste of, if you like, it is greenhouse gases that are being put into the atmosphere. In fact, 10% of all greenhouse gases come from food waste alone. And if food waste was a country, it would be a bigger emitter than many of the biggest countries. It's far more than, for example, aeroplane travel. It far outstrips that in terms of the amount of greenhouse gases. And my last question then is, well, which items do you think that people throw away the most, or that get thrown away the most? And the answer is potatoes are right up there, number one. That every single day we throw away as a country about 3 million potatoes. There are my bananas, Penny. We throw away 1 million whole bananas. Not to mention tomatoes and carrots, and then it's milk, meat and bread coming up next. And the reasons are very varied, and some of them are that one of the biggest things that we're campaigning on at WRAP is that one of the reasons is that people rush around the shops, the kids are screaming, they don't have much time, and they just grab whatever's easiest. And potatoes in a big bag look like they're cheaper, they might or might not be, it's all a bit confusing, but it looks cheaper to buy a big bag of potatoes or to buy a big bag of carrots, when in fact people don't want them all. And then people also get very worried. They think, well, I've had it too long, and even though they're absolutely fine, they throw them away. And that's one of the reasons that we've been campaigning at WRAP, where I work, which is the Climate Action NGO. One of the things we're campaigning for is to have more fresh produce sold loose, so that people can choose what they'll use. And obviously that also reduces the amount of plastic, and that thin plastic that all our fruit and veg come in is often the hardest to recycle in any way at all. And so the fact that people are, every household, an average household, 4 people, is actually throwing away £1,000 a year because they're putting food in the bin that they could still use because they bought too much, because the date labels are confusing and people don't quite know what they can still eat and what they can throw away. And so, what is to be done? And I think the good news is that despite everything, despite all the challenges that we're facing in the world at the minute, and it has certainly gone mad, I think all of us are feeling a bit dizzy from the morning blizzard of bad news. But people's concerns about climate change solidly up there in about this was one done at the end of last year, with about 7 out of 10 people talking about the impact that climate change is having on their lives, and that their concern about it stays very high. It may not be in every case people's top concern, but it is up there as a concern. And when you talk to people about something like loose, people are concerned there, and people are upset and angry that they can see no other option but to buy things in plastic. And they're looking for change. They want the companies to make those changes for them, or the government, so that it is as easy and as cheap for people to buy and to live in a more circular way, because that hardens. So that's some of the work that we do. It's about saying, how can we shift to a circular economy? And in the waste hierarchy, if you like, everything starts with preventing there ever being excess materials in the first place. And then going down, how can we reduce, how can we reuse, and finally, how do we recycle, recover, and perhaps take it back round again? And at the heart of the circular economy is thinking about in mind, which of course is not the way traditionally people have designed things. People have traditionally designed all products only to think about getting them to market. No thought has historically been given to what happens after. And that's one of the biggest shifts in the circular economy, that people start to think about the end of life of a product when they're making it. And we can see this shift in thinking in all the companies that we're working with at WRAP. It is definitely nibbling round the edges. We're on the cusp of making the big shifts to the circular economy. It's absolutely not yet there yet, but nearly all major companies are thinking about this. So to give you one example, just yesterday I was talking to Land Rover, Jaguar Land Rover. And when now they never used to.
Lost you.
We've lost you, Harriet. Mind you, probably me telling her that doesn't help. I'm wondering, while we're trying to sort this out, are you back?
Oh, is it not working?
No, it's all right. We lost you for a bit. So we lost you from Land Rover, if you'd like to go back to that point. Thank you.
Thanks, sorry. It's so weird. It shows it being fine on my monitor thing. I was just saying it's an example of a company that now has a unit that is looking at circular economy. And when they're designing and making cars now, they're thinking about what will happen at the end of its life. And how can they make sure that the materials they use are themselves recycled and can be recycled again at the end of their life. And what it needs to make these shifts, to go from circular economy still being a small slice of the economy to coming back into becoming the mainstream economy, we obviously need all three pillars, if you like, acting. We need government policy, we need action by companies, and then, of course, we need action by communities, by groups, by all of us as citizens. And if any one of those isn't playing its part, the whole thing falls down, which is where we have to really think, how can we get to a place where we have the right policies that give the incentives and the regulations to companies, and then that citizens are also able to play their part, but also to do the pioneering initiatives that we often see from communities like repair cafes, where people are showing the interest in people restoring and repairing and refurbishing things instead of throwing them away. And in the government, to be fair, the Department for the Environment has set up a circular economy task force to look at what would a roadmap be for Britain to have a more circular economy, and what are the policies that we need. And they're taking action on a number of initiatives, including, for example, simpler recycling, which is good news in Northumberland, where many items aren't collected from households, which are collected from households in other parts of the country. And by next year, the whole country will have the same recycling, with all items being collected from households, including food, which until now is again not collected in most of Northumberland and many other counties, by the way, but will become the norm. They're also bringing in this new policy called extended producer responsibility, which is already in place in many parts of Europe, many other parts of the world, which essentially follows a principle of the polluter pays, that companies pay for whatever plastic and packaging they put onto the market. This will come into force this year. But it can also be applied, for example, to textiles, which I'm going to mention in a minute. But that then be used to help collect and restore and recycle it, but that above all else, that provides the incentives to the companies to change the kind of products that they're selling so that they actually put less plastic onto the market. And then we have, for example, deposit return schemes coming in, which anyone who's travelled in Europe knows can be such a normal and effective part of daily life, that you can return your bottles back to the shop or the supermarket where you got them. And that will also be coming into play in the UK in due course. And what we are hoping that the Circular Economy Task Force will look at is looking at some of the policies that will really drive change alongside the ones that are already on the books. And that above all else, we need a really ambitious target to halve resource consumption. That it's only if we put out those ambitious targets that we can start to work towards them. And as I said, the idea that you rethink the production of products, that you design from the beginning are key, but also that we've thought about what happens to them next. And again, another brilliant initiative in parts of the continent to ban planned obsolescence, so that people aren't allowed to put electronics on the market that can only last for so many years, for example, that is banned. And that on the other hand, there's also, this is a great initiative from France, the right to repair, where if you want to get something repaired, the government will give you a voucher, which you can then spend in a local initiative to get your goods fixed. And so that's both then giving you the ability to extend the life of your goods, but it's also, of course, providing jobs and livelihoods to people, bolstering the economy. And I think that is one of the strengths of the circular economy, that it is about jobs and livelihoods that are capital intensive plants. This can be repairing and restoring and refurbishing, can offer jobs to people right across the country, and with all kinds of different levels of skills. And one of the brilliant initiatives in Manchester, brought about by Manchester City Council, putting this into their procurement for the waste collection, is there's a fantastic initiative where when the council collects stuff that households are giving away or throwing away or taking to the tip, they go through everything first to see what could be repaired. And then there are, for example, there's a brilliant initiative that trains young offenders in how to repair bicycles. And so you keep the bikes going, young people are learning skills, and then the repaired bikes are solving people have access to cheaper bikes. Just one of the many brilliant community initiatives that are out there paving the way for the circular economy. Currently, there are about 500,000 jobs in the circular economy. And the trick is, we could double that by 2030 quite easily with some of the right policies in place to encourage these initiatives. There's one thing we'll have to bear in mind, though. It's really interesting. If you look at how many of the jobs in the circular economy do you think are taken by men and how many by women? In the mainstream economy, jobs are roughly half-half. Roughly half the jobs are taken by men, half by women. But we did some research, and very frustratingly, can you hear me, Penny? Good. Very frustratingly, only 25% of the jobs in the circular economy are taken by women. So it's instinctively not what we'd expect, is it? We'd somehow think that it might open fantastic opportunities for both men and women. You will not be surprised to know that women absolutely dominate around the volunteer jobs, working in our lovely Oxfam shops, for example, and other initiatives, of which we have so many in Hexham. Of course, it's very often women who are the volunteers. But once you get further into the circular economy, and so it is one thing we really need to think about as we make that shift. And some of it is about those community initiatives. It's about the repair cafe or the Oxfam shop, keeping clothes and goods in circulation, or our wonderful refill stores. Nearly everybody now has one or two small refill stores in their town, but they are more expensive and they are more difficult, and they're not where everybody's going. And so we also need, of course, to shift the mainstream companies. And here's one example, Currys. Currys have a fantastic initiative called Cash for Trash. You take back your old electricals, they give you a £10 voucher to spend with them. Now, of course, it's encouraging you to go and spend more money at Currys. Of course it is, but that means it's actually working well for them. And items recently, and generating a good number of jobs at Currys as well. As just one example of some of the way that the big companies are going, whether it's in electronics or whether it's in fashion, for example. So you have here always, you have your, if you like, circular natives, companies that have been circular from the beginning. Sometimes this is working at its best when they're teaming up with one of the high street power brands where most people go. So to give you one example, there's a brilliant company called Sojo, run by a very dynamic couple of young women in London. And they have an app. You take an item into M&S, they've connected up with Sojo, who will repair it for you. Regardless, it doesn't have to have come from M&S. Whatever it is, you take it in, they repair it for you. It's an absolutely brilliant linking up of a small and medium-sized company with a big. John Lewis is increasingly renting clothes, encouraging people to rent that dress or that outfit that they need, just as men have often gone down to Moss Bros for their wedding outfit. It's been completely normal, and yet for some reason that's not been so normal right across the fashion market. So how can we encourage more people to rent things instead of all the time buying? Or Primark, for example. Primark has got whole initiatives to teach people how to sew on buttons, how to repair clothes that they've bought. Don't have to be at Primark only, and but how to learning again the skills of how to repair and give clothes a longer life, which is the absolute key. And if you look at, for example, vintage, I mean, if any of you have any young people nearly, absolutely brilliant initiative, because people are getting back into the idea that you don't have to buy new, that it can be hip and trendy to buy secondhand. And of course, that you don't have to hang on to things and keep them sitting there in your cupboard forever. And I'm sure many of us will, many of you, especially those in Northumberland, will have dogs. And this, I'm just going to end with my favourite example of a company that is really paving the way for the circular economy. So they make dog accessories, they're called, which is collars and leads to you and me. But what they do is they work with fishermen to rescue the ghost plastic fishing nets that are floating in the sea, and that are one of the were causes of many deaths of animals and fish in the sea. And so they pay the fishermen to collect them. They've made out these absolutely beautiful, in this case, dog leads. And as they say, they're leading the way with the circular economy. And I hope that we can all work together to see how in our communities, in the pressure we put in companies and the pressure we put on governments, we can help shift the circular economy from being still on the margins to becoming the mainstream economy. Thank you very much. And I hope you could hear some of that.
That was fantastic. Thank you so much, Harriet. And yes, apart from you dropping out once, certainly our end, we could hear everything. Yes, that was great. So just before we invite questions, could you just give a very short description of who's involved in RAP? Just because you're talking about the levels of influence and conversations that you're having, I'm just curious to know how big the organisation is.
So we're about 300 people work for RAP, overwhelmingly in the UK, but also we're expanding globally, and we have an office. The challenges facing our colleagues there in the USA and in Americas, in Australia and APAC, Indonesia, that side of the world. And then we also work with partners all around the world, whether in South Africa or Mexico, in order to take the thinking and apply it globally, because obviously none of this is about one country. And so, for example, we have what we call plastic pacts in about 19 countries now, where people come together to say, what are we going to do about ending plastics pollution in our country? What are we in South Africa, in Mexico? So we're all the time taking the learning from each other. We often work with global companies, so obviously it makes absolute sense to be helping shift their policies at a global level. And then we also want to feed in, for example, to the big global initiatives such as COP. So the big COP coming up this year in Brazil, we're really hoping to see food waste way up the agenda in a way it never has been before. And that's really being championed actually by the Brazilian government, for whom food security is a key issue. Those in need, of course, you're getting a double win. And that's again an example where we need to work globally. So we work globally on these issues. We also then work to influence government policy. We feed into government policy here, in particular in the UK. And then we bring companies together in these packs where they come together and agree to target, measure, act. So they might say, this is an example, we will halve food waste by 2030. They sign up to that commitment. They sign up to report every year on the progress, really difficult issues, of which I'll tell you one of them is on plastics, for example, encouraging people to refill. All the companies have tried different initiatives and they simply haven't taken off with the public. People just walk past the area that does refill, even when it says this is cheaper, even when it's got a mixture of different products in there. People are so used to their way of shopping where they can do it really quickly and they don't. So that's an example where companies are now stuck and they think the only way we can make this shift is if we all work together. And so that's why we also work with all the companies. And we then run campaigns with the public. It's the final piece, as I mentioned. We need all the time, all those three. And our most well-known campaign is Love Food, Hate Waste, which we run every year to try to help support the public to make the shift to wasting less food.
Great, that's lovely. Thank you very much. Okay, we've got, I'd like to ask Richard Jackson. Richard, do you want to ask your question that you've put in the chat? Have we got Richard?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that the Design for Life goods is a great idea, and it was great to hear about it. I do have a worry though, because almost already exists, in a sense. If you buy a Miele washing machine, you're probably going to have it for a lot longer than you are for the, sort of a Hoover washing machine or something. I bought a pair of shoes recently that cost me £160, but I'll probably have them for the rest of my life, you know. So what I'm worried about is that you actually create a two-tier society. I'm already seeing that in the car industry, where the electric cars are mostly being targeted at richer households. So how do we get over that, where people who are buying Primark clothes very often can't afford anything else, but they only last for about six months as opposed to several years if you buy a good T-shirt. So how do we get over that sort of thing?
Part of the dilemma, doesn't it? That it is. Am I okay? Can you hear me? Yes. Okay.
Yes.
That how do we make this totally mainstream? Yeah. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's the question.
And how do we encourage? Yeah. How do we encourage companies who are selling to completely mainstream customers who can't afford to spend more than they are already, to still offer them the options to be part of the circular economy? And how do you disconnect the company's value creation from the constant extraction of virgin raw materials? And that's where things like perhaps renting can work, or looking at making sure that it becomes the norm to make T-shirts that will last 10 years. That you at some point we need to draw the bottom line where it's not okay to sell a £2 T-shirt that doesn't last very long. And that's why we believe it has to be about all the companies working together, because they just think they'll be undercut. So it is about the companies shifting together. In many cases, it needs government regulation. That's why we've been calling for a ban on plastics on 21 items of fresh produce, because any one company alone won't do it. So the companies are actually saying, let's have a ban, because if there's a ban, we're all in the same position, and then none of us are selling it in plastic bags, and we won't be uncompetitive. So it is trying to find a way through so that companies will get behind it. In the end, of course, I mean, companies also make profits, and maybe there needs to be a revaluing of the amount of profits. And in the end, also, it feels all the time like we're trying to solve the problems, societal problems about people not having enough money because they're low paid, or they're on benefits, or they're on very low pensions. And then that's why then we have to make food cheaper and cheaper, even though that's destroying farmers' livelihoods. And you feel in all these issues, we're caught in a dilemma of how can we make these initiatives work for people on low incomes, as well as make them sustainable. And maybe the answers aren't in that particular problem always. Maybe it is about the fact we have such an unequal society, that some people have so little money and disposable income, and some people have so much. And that if you adjust that, it might make it possible to make it more mainstream.
Yeah, thanks. That's great.
But I also think that's where examples like Vinted work very well. Vinted is absolutely within the reach of people on low incomes. In fact, the whole point is you sell an item, initiatives, and then eBay did a tie-up with Love Island, which again helps make this feel really mainstream, that you don't have to have very high disposable incomes in order to be part of the circular economy. And it's really encouraging some of those initiatives is what we're trying to do.
Great. Yeah, thanks.
Right. Thank you very much for your question, Richard. Daphne, you've put a comment about the disparity between men and women working. Do you want to ask a question, or is it just a comment?
I at one stage was involved in clinical waste disposal, and so I'm a member of the Chartered Institute of Waste Management. So I keep up to date with all these kinds of things that you're talking about. And it's just a comment that the waste industry, anyway, doesn't have an awful lot of women in it. How many bin women do you see emptying your bins? So that was just a comment. That's not very surprising if more of the repair shops are perhaps run by men. Not that I think that's necessarily a good idea. But my other question earlier on actually was how much of the food waste is food that you don't eat, like peelings and apple cores and those sorts of things. I mean, I don't throw away any food that's that can be eaten, but we do have a bin full of stuff that I put in the compost because I don't eat apple cores and orange skins and all the rest of it.
So to answer the two questions, firstly, I have to say at RAP, where we have lots of technical experts who love going through data and also love literally going through people's bins. So when we do our food waste data, we've literally gone through people's bins to see what they're throwing away. And absolutely, for food waste, we wouldn't count banana skins. Food has been thrown away. So to answer that question, and I think it is really interesting. We know for sure that when people get food waste bins, they waste less food as a result, because then they see what they're throwing away, and that always has an impact on people. And on the other hand, I know community initiatives around encouraging composting are obviously absolutely brilliant, as you said. That's to keep the parts that really can't be used again, but they can be given a second life as compost and regenerating our gardens and veggie patches. And and indeed, of course, many local authorities use food waste to create compost. There's a pioneering initiative in particular in Newcastle, and there's one in Northumberland County Council as well. But next year in the whole country, we'll see a step change. We're convinced, because it will help the public see the amount of food that's being thrown away. But when we do go through people's bins, we also find, people just throw away whole unopened meals, for example, that they bought pre-prepared, or they throw away huge bags of potatoes that they bought. It's more than they'll ever need, and then in the end they put them in the bin. So that's again where it's also things like date labels and changing what's made available to people that will help with creating some of those shifts. Coming back to women in the circular economy, and great to know you're connected with CIWM, we work a lot with them, in the end, I think it all goes back to fewer women doing STEM. And the more that we can encourage more women to go, the more, of course, I think we can equalize that out. We're still really at the beginning of this research and trying to work out why it is, but we think undoubtedly it's just some of those big societal shifts that will help encourage more women to come into the circular economy.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Harriet. We've got another question. We've got a question from Jim. Jim, do you want to ask your question? This is about the arms industry and the impact on the environment.
Yes, I gather that the research done in America is that the arms trade in its widest form has a greater adverse impact on the environment than the whole of America put together. Quite kind of challenging kind of research. I just wondered, is this measured in the UK?
To tell you the truth, Jim, I don't know. I think it's a great question. I'm happy to take it away and find out. I know there's a big movement to try to stop armaments and bullets being made out of lead, because it will be less environmentally damaging, although I kind of think if you're killing people, it all feels a bit strange. And it feels a very pertinent question at the minute. given that it's only a couple of weeks since the government axed the aid programme that had, of course, been brought in under a Labour government, and that so many of us, I'm sure, on this call campaigned for many years to get aid to 0.7, and now that's being cut in order to help pay for defence spending. It feels such a tragic moment, doesn't it, that all that work to reduce arms sales is now being reversed. And I guess that points, I think, in general, in social and environmental change, so much of what we have to do, you have to just keep going, because you think you've landed something, you think you've made the change that's needed, and then you find it's going backwards in a way you never expected. And I think we see that now with what's happening to aid budgets around the world. We see that now with the questioning of some of the climate commitments to which the world had signed up, and which now, of course, are under question as the US pulls out of many of those agreements. And I think it just continuing to support each other and to keep looking for what are the new ways that we need to help create the social and environmental change we want to see.
Thank you. It's just that, the government's increased expenditure on defence, then over the last week or two, efforts have been made by some leading characters in the Northeast to bring some of that industry to the Northeast. So we have it on our doorstep to think about. So it's not something. And I think, as I understand it, the Paris Agreement on environment excludes anything to do with defence. So the big challenge here, I think.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jim. We've had a question.
Absolutely, which is where I think it's also part. Oh, sorry, Penny, I was just going to say, I think it's also, obviously the government is very focused on jobs, and obviously people need jobs. And I think that's where it's also really important that we're able to show that the circular economy can create as many jobs as the mainstream economy. And the one thing that slightly worries me at the minute is that you've got DEFRA, the Department for the Environment, are leading on this work on a task force on the circular economy, which is really welcome. But what we really want to do is, of course, have Treasury and have the Department for Trade and Industry, as they've been renamed, working, seeing the circular economy as central and not seeing it as a small, sweet little niche for the environmental sector, as it were. I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we face, is to bring that squarely into the mainstream economic thinking. Sorry, Penny.
No, that's fine. I'm sorry. It was the delay meant I interrupted you. We've got a question from David. David, would you like to ask your question about the advertising industry and whether we can stop them encouraging people to buy? Are you there, David?
David said his mic wasn't working.
Okay, well, oh yes, so he did. Yes, that's very true. Thank you very much, Jill. I didn't notice that. It says no mic. So I'll read it out then. So how can we encourage the advertising industry to do less advertising to, in inverted commas, encourage consumption? He says it seems a forlorn hope, but they undermine the circular economy. So that's David's question, Harriet.
Completely agree. I mean, that hits the nail on the head, doesn't it? That there are these juggernauts encouraging people to buy that came out a couple of months ago, where they've visualized the amount of stuff flowing. It sort of puts it in a street, and you just see this mountains of stuff that's being produced and sold to us every day, powered by the advertising industry that helps create this demand. And so there absolutely are those within the sector who are trying to work to change that, to shift to more to marketing for sustainability, to marketing these kind of initiatives where companies are working in the circular economy and trying to shift the focus to that. So there are people within the sector trying to create the change, but then of course there are people making a lot of money out of mainstream ways of selling more and more and creating the demand. But in a way, I kind of think, well, that should give us hope, because if they, which I think we would all agree, if the advertising industry has managed to create and manufacture these needs, so that we all need these things, then they can also put those same skills to helping make that shift to encourage people to repair, restore, refurbish, buy second-hand, to refill instead of all the time buying things in new plastic bottles. So it's getting that industry to shift its focus is the trick, I guess, which some people are working to try to do.
Right, thank you very much. Okay, so this has just been great. I would like to ask a question. So it strikes me, the observation that I would make is that actually it's a multi-pronged approach. So we need to do what we can do on the ground, and across the sector, including government legislation and initiatives. But I never thought I'd say this, because I chaired Vulture Economy last time, Vulture Economics. No, vulture capitalism, sorry. And it is absolutely rapacious. But I think this has really shone a light on the fact that if this is the way that we think, we have to actually incentivize those instincts in the right direction. So that's something you've just highlighted. So I don't know if, because you talked a lot about behaviors and things like that, I don't know if you want to add anything to the different strands that need to occur and need to come together at the right point to affect real change.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, it's really interesting. RAP was formed 20 years ago by an Act of Parliament, as we had to stop putting so much stuff in landfill. And so what happened at that time was they brought in a landfill tax. So companies were taxed on everything that went to landfill. And at the same time, they set up RAP to work with companies and the public to help make the shift. And in that time, we've moved to a position where landfill has just gone down and down and down and down. So I think we can take heart from examples where that has happened. And I was talking to someone in West London who works for the Waste Authority there, and they've now got zero landfill from the whole of the West London. Shifts that can be made if you line up regulation with tax incentives or fines or whichever way, plus you've got the action to help create the infrastructure. And that's another part of the puzzle. That's why so much that very thin, flexible plastic currently is not being recycled, because there simply isn't the infrastructure there, which actually goes back to the question about jobs in the Northeast. There is so much infrastructure needed to recycle more, that there are amazing opportunities to create jobs in that sector. We don't need to go running after the arms industry. And then, as you say, it's critical to have the companies and government making it possible for the public to play and generate these shifts. But it is all of us letting companies and government know what it is we would like to see. And then, of course, encouraging people to make those shifts so that they are ready, for example, to do refill or reuse. To give you one example, we're working on at the minute, the thinking is you can only do it if all retailers and all companies all came together to have the same, let's imagine, shampoo bottle. If every wrapper would be different, and then you could take it back to any store or to any company and you could refill it. And it's only if you shift the whole that actually then everyone will go, okay, well, I'll have to do that now then. Just as we all quickly got used to, you don't get a free plastic bag anymore. You have to pay for it if you want it. So there always comes a moment when it becomes the norm, if you like. But what often people say is, feel they're having to do all this extra work if everyone else isn't. But if everyone's doing it, people will pile in behind it, because everybody's upset by the amount of plastic littering our oceans and our countryside. People want that to end, but they don't want to be working on now where the whole sector shifts and that just becomes the norm. That's where we need to get it to.
Yeah, lovely. Great. Thank you. We've got a question from
Hi,
Kate.
Kate.
Over to you, Kate.
Hi. It just occurred to me when you were talking, I was just thinking about the incinerators that are going to happen in the northeast. Stop incineration northeast. What are your feelings about that and relating to sort of the circular economy and everything?
Yeah, but ultimately we want to get to a position where things aren't going to incineration, that we've found ways to keep goods in the economy, that we've found other ways to give them a second life, a third life, a fourth life. I'll give you one strange example, if you like, but it's the kind of thing we do at RAP. Since it used to be, of course, that people bought their milk in a plastic bottle and chucked it in the bin, frankly, and it went to landfill. Then it went to incineration. We've now got to a position where nearly all your plastic milk bottles come back again as another plastic milk bottle within about 2 weeks. They just go, that there's enough facilities to just keep them in circulation. Now, in the end, of course, we might want to move away from plastics, but that's another huge step. But if we can at least then keep those items out of the incineration and keep them being reused for as long as possible, that's the place we obviously want to get to. So I think the whole goal landfill or incineration at all, and that's sort of the long-term goal we're going to have to work towards. And I do think the health dangers of, I think the health dangers of plastic, the agenda, as people discover that plastic, microplastics are being found in the fish, in people's bloods, in people's bodies. And I think that, again, the same also, of course, with incineration, some of the health and safety implications around that, I think they're only going to go up the agenda.
Great. Thank you, Kate. So Pete from Hexham TV, who is sitting next to me, has got a question that he would like to ask you. I'll read it because he's over the other side of the room. If you had one wish for a new business to work with RAP to prevent waste, what would that startup do? So it's a magic wand moment, Harriet.
Oh, what a lovely question. I think personally, I would love a startup, of which there are one or two actually, that are to take all the raw materials that are used in our electronics and to extract them and keep them being used again. So when I, as you mentioned in my banana suit, when I used to work at Fairtrade, some of the worst conditions I ever saw in my life were in Tanzania, seeing farmers digging for gold without proper helmets, without proper shoes. They would go underground with these rope pulley system to dig out gold that would come up in pans, and then they would shift it out. And to get out the gold from the mud, they were using mercury, and burning it off. But they didn't have proper gloves, they didn't have masks, they didn't have protective gear, and you literally saw people with the red eyes and wandering minds of the, people, the mad as a hatter. People get poisoned by mercury, and these people their lives were being ruined, getting away after just a few years. And I think to get to a position where all those precious raw materials are, that it's mandatory, that they must be put back into circulation, that they must be rescued and used again and again and again. And that, banning that idea of the planned obsolescence, which we were discussing earlier, that people put new products on the market and then the marketing machine drives them behind it, where we were always extracting that, it would be, I think that would be the goal for me. There's one great example, which is the Royal Mint, actually. The Royal Mint has just set up a factory in Wales, where they are extracting precious raw materials from electronics and making very high-end gold jewellery, apparently, out of it, which is rather lovely. and creating jobs. And in Wales is an absolutely brilliant example of how, with an absolutely dedicated focus, they've been able, I mean, they lead they're second best in the world for recycling. They're way ahead of England. And they've had this real focus on creating a circular economy within Wales, jobs in keeping things from Wales in Wales and reusing them. And you can just see the impact that has. So I think that's quite inspiring. And the other well-being of future generations act. So everything they have, every piece of policy or legislation they look at from the perspective of future generations. And they have a commissioner. And I just think that's a brilliant way to help all of us shift from thinking about a longer-term perspective that the planet needs.
Lovely. What a great answer to end on. So we've reached the end of our session. Thank you so much, Harriet. There's so much to think about. And the thing that is so beautiful about what you've described is that there are things on the ground that we as individuals can do, because quite often people feel that they can't influence what's happening, although they want change to happen. So thank you once again for joining us, and please look up the work of WRAP as well as Fair Trade Foundation if you'd like to know more about what they do. So and thank you very much to Hexham TV. Just quickly, please join us on the 12th of April. Alice Wiseman, who is the Director of Public Health in Gateshead and Newcastle, will be speaking on It Takes a City to Raise a Child. She's spoken before, I think, for us, and so that will be very interesting. It's about public health. Also, a little call out, if you're able to make a donation to Hexham Debates, the only cost we have at the moment is our IT costs, so they're quite small, but if you would like to donate, and also sometimes we pay room hire for the in-person debates that we do, please reply to this email notification or send a message through the website. But thank you all so much for coming. Thank you again to Harriet, and we'll see you next month. Thank you.